there's the version of the quitting story that I do tell at parties and stuff, and I just kind of amp up all of the intensity of the situation for effect. And then there's the much more reasoned like analysis of what was going wrong. I think of it as like a relationship, and like when there's of course like, you know, the fight that ends it all and you're just like over, goodbye. But there's of course like a lead up of incompatibility to that juncture. So the first glimmerings of like, oh, I might not want to stay here were like when I, you know, when you enjoy a certain degree of autonomy in your work and you're self-motivating and directing and accomplishing, and then your boss starts to encroach on that, and it's like that pushback of like, but wait, I'm already directing myself in all these ways, but now you're gonna say like, oh no, you're gonna do it this way. Like, I guess when the job responsibilities change, but without proper like packaging of like, here's some new things I need you to do. If your bosses just start kind of becoming dictators rather than co-collaborators, I think that is super irksome to me. Maybe it doesn't bother everybody, but that's when my hackles started going up about like, oh, maybe I'm not going to fit in here long term. So it was like I was on the island already. I was managing blog content, and I got like stolen for some other responsibilities. It was like somebody needed an extended leave of absence and they weren't being replaced. It was just kind of like their work got dumped on me.
And so when that started happening, I think you're absolutely right. I think that irks a lot of people. And so what were some of those, when you specifically said, it made me start thinking this might not be the long-term thing, right? And I'm always curious, like in your mind, when you think long-term, what does that mean? Like, is that being a lifer? Is that being like 10 years? Is that 2 years? Like, everyone has a different view of it. So what did that mean to you? What was that shift? Was it like, oh, I'm going from thinking in 10-year increments to I got to get out in 2 years, or what did it look like?
Yeah, I wish I could say I had like better planning at that point. I think acknowledging that I might not want to remain here, and then ultimately acting on that, it was an indicator that I hadn't really consciously thought like, how long do I want to stay at this company? What is my bigger plan? The truth is, maybe I didn't have one, and I was very much like, I was so deep on board with this project and kind of the new phase of it that we were in. We had just opened this boutique hotel, and so yeah, my responsibilities were changing, but it was alongside these new developments. So to a point, I was kind of a like ride or die with the project, because it needed to get through this really essential phase of like actually opening the first property after all this time marketing it and building it. So it was a time of great change, and I had not mapped out for myself the extent that I wanted to remain with this project. I was way deep in it with that startup mentality of like, we're all making this to happen together. And I think just it's such an intense, high pressure situation, and there's such great potential for like group achievement when you all have such strong passion and belief in the company vision. But it did become a problem for me and for some other people, where we didn't have a strong enough sense of how we were advocating for ourselves in this job. We wanted to be part of the success, but I hadn't really planned for how my success personally was going to be a part of the larger success, and so how to protect that. I just knew when I started feeling like less autonomy and less personal power.
Yeah, I appreciate you kind of laying out what it feels like to work at a startup in this way, because it's really good for folks to hear of like one of the benefits of being at a startup is that, you know, you have a lot more autonomy because there's just too much to do and not enough people. And so they're not going to hopefully micromanage you as much. But then as things started changing and the micromanagement started to creep in, it's like you're losing that one thing that made all this work and all this effort worth it, which was feeling like you had agency. And, you know, losing agency is something that we talk a lot about on this podcast, because whether it's a job search or an actual job you have, or really anything in between, like it's that lack of feeling like you're in control that tends to get under people's skin over time. So what were were there any things that stood out? Like how did the micromanagement look? What did it actually look like on a regular basis?
It was a gradual dumping on of other people's responsibilities because there was a lot of attrition from the startup and people weren't getting replaced. So not only was I losing colleagues that I had enjoyed working with because they were leaving because of their own frustrations. So there was, I think a lot of us were experiencing being micromanaged or just undervalued, or, you know, there's a lot of upset feelings about the way our boss was handling us. And I was kind of one of the last ones left. So it was just a piling on for me personally of like other responsibilities that I didn't feel super qualified to fulfill. Like I already explained, I had an imposter syndrome from the beginning about wanting to represent these properties and these locations well in our content, and being super diligent about trying to do that. So when I started, first I was given the responsibilities of the social media manager who left. So I just threw those in because it was very natural for the blog for me to just take that on, and things were much smoother with the blog after I had been there for a while. So it was manageable, that first one. And then our marketing manager went on this extreme or extended leave of absence, and me covering her responsibilities, I felt much less comfortable with that because it was a lot more top-down management that I didn't have experience with. So the anxiety arising in me was like partially like, oh, this is startup culture. We just do this. We train. But then kind of not seeing a limit to that, and being very young. I was very young. This is that first out of college job. So not having it in me to assert or articulate the scope of my abilities, partially because I loved the challenge and being able to rise to it, but then the anxiety around failure and leading to bad work product, it was starting to balance out there. It was leading me to this point of like having to assert myself in some way. I ultimately did by quitting, but this was one of those bad situations where I was much less in control of it than I would be now.
Yeah. And I appreciate you kind of, you know, sharing those insights into the toxic-ish, I don't know, it might be too strong of a word, but the more toxic sides of the entrepreneur or of the startup world. Because I think, you know, the sort of joke is like, well, we're really excited to work with you, but we're a startup, so we don't really have a ton of money, and like, of course we're going to pay you nothing and put you all this work in your lap. And I always find that to be an interesting one, because I'll like talk with companies that have 500, 600 employees, and they're like, but you know, we're a startup. And I'm like, I feel like at a certain point, you're all just using this excuse to dump a lot of work on people for little pay. And in your case, it's like, it was gradual, right? It's like, oh, a little bit more, oh, a little bit more. Oh, wait, there really is no end when a company is trying to be scrappy to how much they can put on a single person. I appreciate you kind of opening that window a little bit. Is there anything else you want to share on that front?
Well, I think that's very well observed. I think it's just a hallmark of toxic work culture, which, like you said, extends far beyond startups to maybe what places it doesn't belong. And just So in my case, yeah, that points to a good truth that valuing your employees and providing for their comfort in the positions they fill is really a good thing for bosses to be doing, because I might have stayed if that were happening for me at that job. And kind of one of my main takeaways to share with your audience is that notion of like, maybe if we're going to work for startups, maybe we really need a mentor specific to that environment to help us through it. But if, like you said, it's carte blanche for employers to treat people how they want, being maybe overused under
Hmm.
a umbrella where it doesn't belong, even more so. Yeah, if you're working for a quote unquote startup, you absolutely need a startup mentor.
And it cuts both ways, right? Because companies are saying, oh, well, we're a scrappy startup, so we can't bring people on. We're like on a hiring freeze, we're et cetera, et cetera. So they have the built-in excuse of, well, it makes sense that we have to put all this work on a single person. And then the workers are like, well, I chose to work at a startup, so I really need to step up to the plate and I need to be able to do whatever it is they give me, and be able to work nights and weekends and all that good stuff, regardless of the pay. So it is I think that there's companies that do it right, companies that try to do it right, but then have a hard time with it. And then companies that maybe are a little bit malicious, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt for now.